not be very aware of. And talking about their stories, learning about their stories, and then learning about how it's not just their story. This is us. Last week, we talked about a little-known person by the name of Enoch. He happened all the way back in the beginning of the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. So, we have the creation, and then a few chapters later, we have Noah. So what comes in the middle of those two? This guy named Enoch. So we remember, and we talked about how Enoch was the seventh generation of the line of Adam. Adam was made perfect, and he sinned against God. Enoch was a sinner. Became reconciled with God, to which Genesis tells us that he walked with God all his days after a turning point in his life. So, we talked about and discussed how if we are to be walking with God, we who are definitely sinners, how can we walk with God like Enoch walked with God? So that's what we did. We talked about reconciliation. We talked about how God walks with us every single day and offers for us to walk with Him. Today we come to our second little-known character in the Bible by the name of Mordecai. He is found in the 10-chapter book of Esther. Now, some of you may be saying, "Oh, Pastor, I don't really know the books of the Bible all that well. I can't wait this week to read about Esther." Right? Well, let me help you, because that's what I'm here to do. Everyone, see the Bibles in front of you in the pew. Go ahead and take one of those out. Now remember, here at Advent, if you don't have a Bible, or you know someone who doesn't have a Bible, feel free to take one and give it to them, or keep it for yourself. Now, take the Bible and open it to halfway. Halfway. See if you can get it right down the middle. If you go right down the middle and opening it, what book do you come to? Psalm. Now, some of you have been, I'm looking at Jan, she literally went like this. Okay, look, you might know this. Now, Esther is actually 2 books before Psalm. So if you just split a couple of books beforehand, you're going to find the book of Esther. It's that easy as you read this week. So, now, as much as I know you love reading the Bible, put it away because I'm going to keep talking. Okay? Now, the book of Esther is a really important book. It's actually only one of 2 books in the entire Bible. How many books are there in the Bible? How many in the Old? How many in the New? Alright, so out of the 39 books of the Old Testament, actually out of the entire 66 book catalog in the Bible, only two are named after women. Esther and Ruth. So, if there's only 2 books of the Bible named after women, this must be a pretty important book to pay attention to. So let's pay attention to it. Esther is one of the more exciting and curious books in the entirety of the Bible. It contains a classic storybook ingredient of a bold and beautiful heroine. I mean, Wonder Woman's got nothing on Esther. I mean, she's hot. And she's a beast. Okay? She's Beauty and Beast. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, I tell you, and in this book, I mean, you've got love interests, you've got a life or death situation for the good guys, you have a villain who's absolutely lovable to hate. You really want to hate him as much as you can. And of course, we have a happy ending. There are suspense and dramatic irony, there is a ton of humor, and reversals of fortune and poetic justice. Really, the story has it all, except for God. This is the only book in the Bible that does not mention God. It doesn't even have people praying. Nothing at all. Not even once. But wait a second, hold on here. I thought the Bible is a book about God. Shouldn't, of all the things that should be talking about God, shouldn't every book of the Bible be talking about God? This curious fact has actually bothered a lot of people throughout history. Some resolved the tension by classifying Esther as a secular book in the Bible. So is it? Or is this interpretation missing something important? You see, I argue that the absence of mentioning God is actually directly connected to the brilliance of this book's literary design. What do I mean? Well, I could go into a big, long talk about what a chasm is, a literary device that has details that go here and there. If you're a song person, anybody here likes to listen to music, you know probably, even if you don't know it expressively, you know it implicitly, and that is, a song has a format. You have A, B, A prime, B prime, C, A, B prime, something like that, okay? So you have A, which is the beginning of the song. That's what hooks you. B is something kind of cool. Then you have C, which is this weird part in the song. It doesn't sound exactly like, it does go on, but it's different from the rest that you've heard. And then you have, say, B prime, which reminds you of what you already heard, but it's a little different. And then you have A, which takes you back to the familiar, but it's a little different with A prime. That's the way it is with the story. We have an A, B, C, which is a pivot point in our story, and then B prime and A prime. So it looks symmetric, but with a little bit of difference and a turning point in the middle. That's the long answer for it. The short answer is this. Even without mentioning God by name, the evidence of God's will and providence and presence is present in this story. If you just look between the lines. So I'll tell you what, let's learn more about Mordecai and Esther, and we're going to watch a video, and I want you to see throughout this video if you can tell where God is.
The Book of Esther. It's one of the more exciting and curious books in the Bible. The story is set over 100 years after the Babylonian exile of the Israelites from their land. And while some Jews did return to Jerusalem, remember Ezra and Nehemiah, many did not. And so the Book of Esther is about a Jewish community living in Susa, the capital city of the ancient Persian Empire. And the main characters in this story are two Jews, Mordecai and then his niece Esther. And then there's the king of Persia, who's something of a drunken pushover in this story. And then there's the Persian official Haman, the cunning villain. Now, this is a curious book in the Bible, mainly for the fact that God is never even mentioned, not once, which might strike you as kind of odd. I mean, isn't the Bible about God? But this is a brilliant technique by the author, who's anonymous, by the way. It's an invitation to read this story looking for God's activity, and there are signs of it everywhere. The story is full of very odd, quote, coincidences and ironic reversals, and it all forces you to see God's purpose at work, but behind the scenes. Let's just dive into the story. The book opens with the king of Persia throwing two elaborate banquet feasts that last a total of 187 days, and it's all for the grandiose purpose of displaying his greatness and splendor. On the last day of the banquet feast, he's really drunk, and he demands that his wife, Queen Vashti, appear at the party to show off her beauty. She refuses, and so in a drunken rage, the king deposes Vashti and makes the silly decree that all Persian men should now be the masters of their own homes. Then he holds a beauty pageant because he wants to find a new queen. This is like a really bad soap opera. But it's right here that we're introduced to Esther and Mordecai. Esther hides her Jewish identity and enters the beauty pageant and wins. And the king is so obsessed with Esther that he elevates her to become the new queen of Persia. Now after this, and even more serendipitous, is the fact that Mordecai just happens to overhear two royal guards plotting to murder the king. And so he informs Esther, who in turn informs the king, and Mordecai gets credit for saving the king's life. Now right here from the beginning, God's not mentioned anywhere, but this all seems providentially ordered. What is it that God's up to? You have to keep reading. We're next introduced to Haman, who's not actually a Persian. He's called an Agagite. He's a descendant of the ancient Canaanites. Remember 1 Samuel chapter 15. The king elevates Haman to the highest position in the kingdom, and he demands that everybody kneel before Haman. Well, when Mordecai sees Haman, he refuses to kneel, which of course fills Haman with rage. And when he finds out that Mordecai's Jewish, Haman successfully persuades the king to enact this crazy decree to destroy all of the Jewish people. And to decide the date of the Jews' annihilation, Haman rolls the dice. A die is called pur in Hebrew. Tuck that away for later. 11 months later, on the 13th of Adar, all the Jews will die. Haman and the king then have a drinking banquet to celebrate their really horrible decision. So the focus now turns to Mordecai and Esther, who are the only hope for the Jewish people. They make a plan that Esther's going to reveal her Jewish identity to the king and ask him to reverse the decree. But approaching the king without a royal request is, according to Persian law, an act worthy of death. So in a key statement, Mordecai, he's confident that even if Esther remains silent, that deliverance for the Jews will arrive from another place. And then Mordecai wonders aloud. He says, who knows? Maybe you've become queen for this very moment. Esther responds with bravery, and she purposes to go to the king with her amazing words, if I perish, I perish. Now, in what unfolds, we watch the ironic reversal of all of Haman's evil plans. So Esther hosts the king and Haman at a first banquet, and she says that she wants to make a special request of both of them at an exclusive banquet the following day. So Haman leaves the banquet totally drunk, and he sees Mordecai in the street. He fumes with anger, and he orders that a tall stake be built so that Mordecai can be impaled upon it in the morning. It seems like things can't get any worse for the Jews and for Mordecai. But all of a sudden, the story pivots. It just so happens that night, the king, he can't sleep, and he has the royal chronicles read to him for good bedtime reading, and he just happens to hear about how Mordecai had saved the king's life. He had totally forgotten. So in the morning, Haman enters to request Mordecai's execution, and the king in that moment orders Haman to honor Mordecai publicly for saving his life. So now Haman has to lead Mordecai around the city on a royal horse, telling everyone to praise him. Now this moment in the story, it's a pivot for the whole book. It begins Haman's downfall and Mordecai's rise to power. Watch how this works. The day after is Esther's second banquet. So the king and Haman arrive, and Esther informs the king that first of all she's Jewish, and second that Haman has enacted a decree to murder her and to murder Mordecai, who saved his life, and to murder all of the Jews. Now the king's had a lot to drink, so when he hears this news, he goes into yet one more drunken rage, and he orders that Haman be impaled on the very stake he made for Mordecai. It's ironic and a grisly way for Haman to go. Haman's execution, however, doesn't solve the problem of the decree to kill all of the Jews. So the focus now turns to Esther and Mordecai as they make a plan to reverse the decree. They discover that the king can't revoke a decree that he's already made. So instead, the king commissions Mordecai to issue a counter-decree. On the appointed day that all of the Jews were supposed to be killed, the 13th of Adar, now the Jews are ordered to defend themselves and to destroy any who plotted to kill them. Then Mordecai, Esther, and Jews everywhere hold banquets and feasts to celebrate this new decree, and Mordecai is elevated to a seat beside the king. Eventually, the decreed day comes, and the Jews triumph over their enemies. First, they destroy Haman's family, and then any other Persian officials who had joined in Haman's plot. And then on a second day, they get permission to destroy any who plotted against them throughout the entire kingdom. This results in joy and celebration as the Jews are rescued from annihilation. The story then tells about how Esther and Mordecai established by decree this annual 2-day feast of Purim to commemorate their deliverance from destruction. And the name of the feast comes from Haman's dice. Remember, Purim. The book concludes with a short epilogue as Mordecai is elevated to second in command in the kingdom, and we are told now of his royal greatness and splendor as the Jews thrive in exile. Now, step back. Notice how this whole story has been designed. The story was full of moments of ironic reversal, but we can now see the whole story is structured as an ironic reversal, right down to the details. So the king's splendor and feasts and decrees are mirrored by Mordecai's splendor and feasts and decrees at the end. Esther and Mordecai, they first saved the king, but now in the end they save all of the Jews. Then you have Haman's elevation and edicts and banquet that gets reversed by Mordecai's elevation and edict and banquet. And then at the center you have Esther and Mordecai's planning scenes, and then Esther's 2 banquets that act as a frame around the greatest moment of reversal in the whole story: Haman's humiliation and Mordecai's exaltation. Beautiful. Another fascinating feature of this book is the moral ambiguity of the characters. There's a lot of drinking and anger and sex and murder, of which Mordecai and Esther are a part. Not to mention their violation of many commands in the Torah, like marrying Gentiles or eating impure foods. And so the story's not putting Mordecai and Esther forward as moral example. as if it endorses all of their behavior. But they are put forward as models of trust and hope when things get really bad. And so the book of Esther comes back to that question with which we began: why God is not mentioned. The message of this book seems to be that when God seems absent, when his people are in exile, when they're unfaithful to the Torah, does this mean that God is done with Israel? Has God abandoned his promises? And the book of Esther says no. It invites us to see that God can and does work in the real mess and moral ambiguity of human history, and he uses the faithfulness of even morally compromised people to accomplish his purposes. And so the book of Esther asks us to be willing to trust God's providence even when we can't see it working, and to hope that no matter how bad things get, God is committed to redeeming his world. And that's what the book of Esther is all about.
So, now you know more about the book of Esther. Probably more than you probably did. Definitely before you came in here, right? Yeah. And that's the story. Mordecai, maybe he wasn't a model Jew, but didn't he embody what we read in Micah 6:8? The Lord has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. There are a lot of things that we see in our week, the news, things at work, things at home. And you might be wondering to yourself, where is God in all of this? How do we know that God is there as we go about living in the secular world? And perhaps like Mordecai, when you see a need, you see something and maybe you feel that tug in your heart, like with the blessing bags. That tug in your heart, maybe, just maybe, if you're seeing a need, maybe that's God calling you to that need. Mordecai is a great example of this. Mordecai saw his cousin Esther without parents. She was orphaned. So what did he do? He didn't say, well, good luck with that. He said, I will raise you as my own. And he raised her as his own daughter. The need was the call. Mordecai heard about the plot to kill the king. He did something to stop a murder. The need was the call. I know for me, I always would just love for God to email me, text me, whatever, so I know what God wants me to do in my life. Maybe you do too. But it doesn't seem like God's voice is going to touch our ears and speak to us directly and tell us what to do. If God does that, awesome. But that hasn't happened to me yet. So what do we do? If God's voice isn't touching our ears, we need to realize that that doesn't mean that God isn't speaking. God can and does speak to us. And we are best equipped to hear God, to see God, when we're in a relationship with God. Reading God's Word, listening for God in prayer, walking the ladder that our youth made last year, taking time set apart to be with God, listening to music that points us to God. We as followers of God are made alive in Jesus Christ by his life, death, and resurrection. And we are called to be attuned to God's presence. Being on the lookout. To be on the lookout for God's answer to our prayer. And also to be on the lookout as we are ready to be God's answer to someone else's prayer. No, Mordecai was not a good Jew. He didn't move back to Palestine like he was supposed to. He did things that the law, the Torah, forbid. Yet God did amazing things with him, through him, and in him. And not just in him, but this is us. We all do things we're not supposed to. We all do things that God doesn't want us to do. Things that we need forgiveness for. Yet that doesn't mean that God has abandoned us until we get our acts straight. God promises out of love, out of grace, out of compassion. God is with you always. Jesus says, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. God is at work in your life through others, and God is at work for others through you. This week, take heart. And know that God is with you. Even if you can't see God, God is there. Have faith. Take a moment read between the lines.